This year, Google brought back the Nexus line with two iterations. The Nexus 6P has P for premium, and then the X in Nexus 5X stands for... what the hell does it stand for again? Well, Google is apparently expecting the core experience in the Nexus 5X, so we're going to go ahead and put these two devices head to head. It's Joshua Vergara from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And this is the Nexus 6P versus the Nexus 5X. As is always the case, if you want the more minute details, including the spec sheets for both of these devices, you can head over to the card that's appearing right now to go to androidauthority.com to read up on even more about these two devices. The story in design should be fairly obvious as we're dealing with two different size devices, with the larger one being the Nexus 6P, which thus provides a little bit harder handling for one hand because of its 5.7-inch screen, but thanks to flat sides, it is pretty easy to grip nonetheless. The Nexus 5X, on the other hand, has a plastic design that feels a little bit hollow and is very reminiscent, at the very least, to the original Nexus 5 that everyone seemed to love so much, including us here at Android Authority. Really, the story here is whether or not you want the premium materials. The metal body, along with that large black slab on the top of the back, provide all of the premium materials and design aspects that you would want from a high-end device. And it feels really awesome in the hand compared to the much lighter and actually somewhat hollow feeling plastic design of the 5X. That's not to say that the 5X is really all that bad in its design, however, it just feels a little bit more, let's say, generic. We don't think it's very much cheap at all because it brings the same typical design that the Nexus 5 had, and that was one of our favorite design phones of the Nexus line in general. We start to see more differences in the displays as the spec sheets start to rear their ugly heads here and show that one device is certainly much more premium than the other. The Nexus 6P has a Quad HD AMOLED display that, as you can see in this shot right here, is already providing some more saturated colors than the more washed out LCD that comes in at full HD resolution of the Nexus 5X. Now, that's not to say that the display on the 5X is bad, it's just that you really do see the differences when you pit these two displays against one another. The Nexus 5X does have that little bit of washed out color on there across the entire board, but the AMOLED display with its deeper blacks is sort of getting the advantage here. Higher resolution is also nice on the 6P, but it's not necessarily essential when it comes to the 5X because the 1080p display still provides a pretty good amount of sharpness and a lot of fun for all media and play. And the Nexus 6P simply is just the overachiever in this regard, and with the larger display, if you want more real estate, you could definitely get it in a more premium device. In performance, the price you end up paying for either of these devices actually kind of reflects what you're getting underneath the surface. The Nexus 6P provides the Snapdragon 810 along with 3 GB of RAM, which with the more demanding power users of Android, this is the package that you're probably going to be going for. But the Nexus 5X provides the essential Snapdragon 808, which is a pretty good performer in its own right, so the more important piece of information is the 2 GB of RAM that it comes with as well. Now, it is possible to sort of overload the Nexus 5X a little bit more, but we do still think that performance is kind of neck and neck here. We do think that the Nexus 5X, especially in loading up games and certain applications, is a step or two behind, as you can see here. But really, it's not so much back that we would pretty much take out the Nexus 5X as a contender. Not at all, really. We think that the Nexus 5X provides just the right amount of performance for the common daily user, while the 6P simply just performs a little bit more above and beyond. In hardware, it's just as much about what these phones have in common as it is about what they don't. After all, you get the same Nexus imprint-powered fingerprint reader on both of these phones, and they both work really well. Setting up a fingerprint is really easy, and then the motion is just as easy as when you're taking the phone out of a pocket or off a table. You're just landing your index finger onto the sensor, and the phone is awoken and unlocked in a very quick way. Sound is a bit different, however, as the Nexus 6P does have dual front-facing speakers here on the front, while the Nexus 5X has literally half of that. And that's true also for the quality. It's just this one speaker down here on the bottom, and while it is able to provide a little bit of body, it just isn't as loud and doesn't provide the same stereo quality that the Nexus 6P does. In battery, we're obviously working with two different sized batteries here, as 3450 mAh is in the Nexus 6P and 2700 mAh is in the 5X. Now the 6P does get at least 2 days worth of battery life, especially if you take advantage of doze, where you just leave the phone with none of the sensors being triggered and it puts all apps into a certain sleep mode, and you only get notifications if they are prioritized. You get the same in the 5X also, and you will be able to eke out a little bit more battery from it, but for the most part in the 5X you can pretty much expect to have to charge it every single night. Now what's really great is that with the USB Type-C cords that come with these, they do take advantage of a higher power current from the plug adapters that are included. What sucks about that is that you're not going to be using Qualcomm Quick Charge anymore. So if you bought into that particular standard, unfortunately, you won't be able to use it with these new Nexus devices. That said, however, either of these devices will charge up to 0 to 100 in under 90 minutes, which is really great. It only takes about 10 to 30 minutes to get even just enough power to get past the next part of your day, really. So you should be able to plug this in the middle of the day, and when you do so, you'll never want for power with either of these phones. And in camera, we have the same package for both of these, which once again is a great thing about these two new Nexus devices, is that they both provide very good experiences and provide a lot of the same features. Now in the cameras, we have a 12.3 megapixel camera that is backed by laser autofocus and a dual LED flash for both of the phones. And when you get into the applications, they also provide the same experience. A little bit bare bones, let's put it. You get a good auto mode that allows you HDR plus on auto if you so wish to put so. And from there, you also get UHD 4K video recording. But what we had a lot of fun with here was the slow motion recording that does 120 frames or 240 frames per second that is recorded at 720p resolution. But aside from all of these extra modes, including lens blur, panorama, and photosphere, you don't get a whole lot of manual control over your shots and videos. That said, however, the quality of these cameras is honestly much better than any other Nexus device, and it actually is kind of up there as a good camera companion to have on the daily. They may not be the absolute best cameras that are out there, but they certainly made us pretty happy in our usage of them thus far. The details are all captured quite well, and the colors have that little bit of saturation that should be able to please anyone looking for punchier photos. Low light capabilities are also quite good on here, but you're not really expecting too much from super low light situations. But we will say that these cameras happen to do a little bit better than some of the other flagship phones that only provide you a big ball of fuzz when you try to get a low light shot. Honestly, the biggest story here is that finally Google got the cameras on the Nexus line right. And in these two phones, if you really want the pure Android experience, you're also going to get a pretty good camera, and you're not really going to have to want for any other phones if this is the one that you want. And finally, in software, as these are Nexus devices, you're going to get the updates and the software at the latest and greatest, and that is Android Marshmallow version 6.0. Now, there are a few key additions to what is already a pretty familiar Android experience here in stock Android. Of course, the app drawer has been updated to a vertical scroll, but also has a line at the top for your most used applications. Doze is what we already took a bit of a look at in the battery section, and as long as you keep the phone from really moving, you just let it sit still for a little while, you should be able to get a great standby mode and standby time that keeps the battery from draining too quickly. After that, you also have app permissions, which are all available in the settings, but when you install new applications and they access a key part of the phone for the first time, then the app permissions will ask you if you really wanted to access that part of your phone. And finally, there's Google Now on tap. Now, this is not a replacement for Google Now, as Google Now is still part of the home screens, but it is an ability for you to be able to search anything on the screen currently in a very quick way. As long as the text is plainly there in its entirety and it's not part of an image, then when you hit Google Now on tap by holding the home button, it should be able to pull a number of the items that are on the screen currently. And it does work pretty well when it does come in handy. It's kind of a sublime experience when you are looking at, let's say, a text message and you want to be able to search something on there like an address. It does pull it down, and when it does, it feels really awesome to do so. In the end, however, the reason why you're even getting these two devices is because of those updates, and with Marshmallow, we have a great start to what might be a nice update cycle for these two Nexus devices for 2015. So we've explored these two devices, and as we have been finding out in each section, the premium moniker is definitely true for the Nexus 6P, while the essential 5X is providing still a good experience without really going too far and beyond. And it reflects this in the price. $499 is what you're going to be paying for the Nexus 6P, while the Nexus 5X will start at $379. But as is our recommendation for the 5X, you might want to shell out just a little bit more money to make sure you get the 32GB version if this is the phone that you want. And so there you have it for the Nexus 6P and the Nexus 5X. We're looking at two different ways of looking at the Nexus line this year, which is awesome because normally we only get one. But this year we have a little bit of choice. With the Nexus 6P, you get the absolute best that Google and in this case Huawei are providing for the Android ecosystem in a great body that has a lot of power underneath. And honestly, it is one of those phones that when you pick it up, it invokes a bit of emotion. The Nexus 5X doesn't necessarily have that same level of emotion unless you are a fan of the original Nexus 5. And if you are, this phone just might be the one that you want to get because it brings back all those lovely memories of the Nexus 5. No, the body is not premium. It actually has a bit of a hollow feel because of the plastic, but it still provides many of the same features, especially the camera and the Android Marshmallow underneath. That's just maybe one or two small steps behind because of the slower performance package on here. But still, the 5X is essential, whereas the P in Nexus 6P might provide premium. And those are really the differences between these two devices, and you couldn't go wrong with either of this year's great Google Nexus iterations. Keep it tuned to Android Authority. Our full reviews for both of these devices are coming very soon. So stay tuned for Lon's Nexus 5X review, and then of course the 6P is being reviewed by me. Then you can stick around and you can watch the content from all my other colleagues in Android, and then you can stick around for even more and head on over to AndroidAuthority.com because we are your source for all things Android.